Hello, this is Dr. Carney, and this is a very brief introduction to literary criticism in the ancient world that's not going to include commentary on Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle were explored in part 1 and 2 of this three-part series. This is a very brief one, just going to highlight a few theorists that Anne Stevens, in her introduction to literary criticism and theory, explores in the chapter on ancient criticism. She talks about, for example, Horace. Horace, he was a soldier, a poet, and politician. He was Roman, and he wrote, he's mostly known for his poetry, his Horatian odes, particular form of celebration. In terms of literary criticism, he's known for the art of poetry, or ars poetica. His view of poetry is that it should be unified in form, that the poet should have technical mastery of form. It's unlike, for example, Plato in the Phaedrus, where he articulates, poetry as a form of divine inspiration, right? That the poet actually loses control of their faculties in order to write. Think Homer calling upon the muses to make him speak eloquently and beautifully, right? The poet is not really deploying their technical skill. The poet's actually being driven by this mystical energy. Horace, we can kind of see Horace's view of poetry as contrasting that. Also, Horace articulates this idea that poetry should not just be delightful, it should not just bring joy, but it should also edify and be educational. And perhaps we can see this as in harmony with Plato's commentary in the Republic, in the parts of the Republic where he's very suspicious of poetry because it's going to have an effect on society, on soldiers, on the people, on the people's morality, on the soldiers' courage, right? Poetry for Plato, should be considered very closely for its effects on society. Horace, I think, would probably agree, and in that way, this should not just be a distraction; it should also instruct. The next figure, Quintillian, is an educator, a public servant, and a rhetorician, i.e. he teaches rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the art of oratory, the art of getting people to become hospitable to you, using language to do that. He's later than Horace, 35 to 100, and he is a major influence on medieval and Renaissance education. And when we get to the medieval curriculum, known as the trivium and the quadrivium, the 3 subjects and the 4 subjects, we'll see Quintilian's influence. But his major work is the Orator's Education, or the Institutio Oratorio, and it discusses various figures of speech, tropes, and devices whereby artists and orators use a word in an unusual way to embellish their speech. Some examples of his figures of speech are simile and metaphor. Simile using like or as, metaphor just comparing one thing to another, synecdoche and metonymy, irony. To an extent, this rhetoric's handbook is a genre in the ancient world. Cicero, another famous Roman orator, has similar handbooks. Basically, they're technical guides for how to be a better orator, a better public speaker for civil society purposes. Very quick overview of Quintilian. He's going to be interesting from the point of view of literary formalism because he gives us some of the language that we use to talk about poetry and fiction. And then Longinus, not an actual person, more of a placeholder name. Sometimes people use the term pseudo-Longinus. I'm not sure of the history of why this name was attached to this essay, an essay on the sublime. It's one of the first articulations of the concept of the sublime, and for this reason or that, it was not influential in Western literary criticism until the middle of the 16th century. It kind of starts the Enlightenment thinkers' commentary on the sublime. In this Longinus's essay, it identifies a unique aesthetic category of the sublime, and it goes through various sources of the sublime in literature. So, grand conceptions. We're going to think about heroes facing insurmountable opposition. That's a grand conception. Vehement emotions. We're more concerned with courage and passion and anger, rather than the humdrum emotions of like frustration and annoyance and maybe domestic affection. Sublime should also be rendered in well-chosen figures of speech. I don't think it's fair to say that it needs to be like embellished or extremely ornamental. Actually, Longinus is kind of against that, but the language should be transparent and direct. It shouldn't be maybe we can use the word like in there's an art movement called Rococo, excessively embellished, kind of precious, right? Not so. It should be direct, transparent, and intense. Good diction is part of that as well. The appropriate word should be selected rather than something because it's beautiful or lyrical. And then elevated word arrangement. Think of if you're part of an organized religion, like liturgical language. The words are arranged in such a way to kind of set it off from ordinary speech, so that you know that you should be attending to it. That's kind of part of this view of the sublime. Now, I should say this view of the sublime is going to influence some of the more major articulations of the sublime that come later in the 18th century by famously Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant, and we'll talk about that when we get to that section of the class. But yeah, that's pretty much it. There's a lot more to ancient literary criticism than Plato, Aristotle, Horace, Quintillian, and Longinus, but those are the figures that we talked about in this class. So, all right, thank you very much, and have a good day.